Well, good evening, and thank you all for braving the rain and miserable conditions outside to come to what I think you'll find is going to be a very special session. We're thrilled to have you all here. I'm Paul Revel. This is an Askwith forum, a gathering of our Harvard Graduate School of Education community and the larger community to periodically discuss the issues of our time. This is the last Askwith Forum of the year. I want to thank Jody Smith-Bennett for all her work in helping us set up the program tonight and move forward. I'm going to say a word about what we're discussing and then talk with you a little bit about the shape of the program and then bring our amazing panel to the stage. So just a word, we use the term Cradle-to-Career in talking about the work that we'll be exploring tonight. And this is Cradle-to-Career place-based partnerships. Over the past 2 decades, these collaborative efforts have become a critical and increasingly popular approach to addressing our nation's most pressing socioeconomic and educational challenges. From the pioneering work of the Harlem Children's Zone to the federal promise neighborhoods, into the broader collective impact movement, place-based partnerships have emerged as networks of people and organizations in the same geographic area working together to achieve shared goals, change systems, and improve community outcomes, especially outcomes for children and families. This work intentionally broadens the boundaries of education beyond schooling, and that's a critical point that we'll be talking about tonight, that this is education with a capital E, and it goes well beyond schooling. Broadens beyond education, beyond schooling, to include the broader ecosystems of children's lived experience and the supports and opportunities each family needs to restore social mobility in this country. And we have the sort of best panel you could possibly dream of to talk about this work. They are our nation's premier leaders in doing this kind of work, and I'm going to introduce them in a few moments. But I wanted to share with you, before I get to that, just a few slides that goes into a little greater depth than the sort of superficial overview that I just gave you relative to what this work is about. So if you'll bear with me just for a few minutes, we'll go through these. So here's our theory of the problem. We have, since the 1940s, a declining social mobility. In the 1940s, 90% of young people could expect to earn more than their parents. Today, only for children born in the 1980s who are adults now, only 50% of them can expect the same outcome. So that's a graph you see on your left. On your right, you see a graph Sean Reardon at Stanford University did that is about, if you imagine in that graph, every one of those small circles, those lavender circles, is a school district adjusted for size. And what you see there is a straight northwest line. The horizontal axis has to do with socioeconomic status, and the vertical axis has to do with educational achievement. And so this shows you a straight line, iron law correlation between socioeconomic status and educational achievement and attainment. We as a nation attacked that line through doing school reform throughout the 1990s and the early part of this century. But the results have been fairly modest. And so it means it's time to re-examine and rethink our theory of the problem. The theory of the problem about what's causing inequity behind the school reform movement was schools were failing, schools were not working as well as they should. If we could fix schools, we could realize Horace Mann's dream of schooling being the great leveler in our society, being the key to creating a level playing field, and then effort and talent would rise to the top. Well, we had a live natural experiment with that. We've had it for over a century, really a century and a half of modern education, and in particular in the education reform movement. And the results in terms of a school optimization approach to achieving equity have been very modest. And there are reasons for that. School-centric approach, 80% of children's waking hours are spent outside of school, not inside of school. We tend to measure things like learning in school, but the sum total of a child's schooling experience is 20% of their waking hours, and therefore schooling is a, relatively speaking, weak intervention in the lives of children. The kinds of services and supports beyond schooling that we supply are fragmented. And we tend to take, in our way of schooling and our way of treating families and children, all too often a factory model. If they're all roughly the same age, they must have roughly the same needs, the same aptitudes, the same trajectories, and we treat them as though we're teaching to the average. That's how we sum it up. And we all know that all children are different. There's no such thing as average. Any of us who have multiple children know the differences between our own children, let alone arraying children of all different backgrounds in the same situation. So the system is not really built for success. And this movement aims to transform that school-centric approach to a cross-sector and comprehensive approach, a more holistic approach, looking 360 degrees, 365 days a year. Making the services and supports that families need, the opportunities, part of a comprehensive, connected, coordinated system where the various partners and service providers and opportunity providers work together. And that system is in itself personalized. We happen to believe at Ed Redesign every child deserves a success plan and a navigator to work with them on that plan. But the system has to be personalized and responsive, not a factory model, batch processing, industrial age model, which is really the design of our contemporary school system. So what we really see our work as being is, and I think should be the work in a school of education, is about constructing a cradle-to-career pipeline. That we're architects as educators and educational policymakers. We're architects of building this cradle-to-career pipeline. Yes, we need a core pipeline of early childhood, K-12, and post-secondary education, and it should be universally accessible and universally of high quality. Right now, the only criteria that is met is the K-12 system is universally accessible, but it's not universally high quality. And the other two, post-secondary and early childhood, are not universally accessible, nor are they uniformly of high quality. So we need to have that pipeline, work on that pipeline. That's the work of school improvement. That's work we should be doing. Taxpayers invest a lot of money in that work. That's important work to do. But wrapped around that, and including the families of the children, need to be a system of opportunities and supports that make it possible for each and every child to come to school every day ready to learn. To be able to do for all children in constructing this default pipeline what those of us who have privilege are able to do for our own children without even thinking about it when we get up in the morning. So that's why we created Ed Redesign here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. I'm just going to say a few words about Ed Redesign and our aspirations and our work, because again, I think it's important that a school of education is looking beyond the boundaries of school to the broader environment. We're committed to all children having clear and accessible pathways to well-being, educational achievement, civic engagement, and upward mobility. That's the purpose. We thought maybe one day we could achieve that all through good schools, but it's now clear it's going to take more than just good schools to do that. And we do it through two critical strategies. I'm sorry, there's a lot of text on here. I don't expect you to read all of that. But the main point is here, we need to bring, it takes, we have this phrase, it takes a village to educate a child. We're partially working on building the architecture to bring the whole community to the table, to complement and augment and extend the work of schools, to make it possible for each and every child to flourish, to make it possible for each and every child to come to school and be ready to learn when they get there. So part of that is bringing the rest of the village to the table, and the other part of it is personalizing it, starting our redesign work by focusing in on the individual customer, if you will, the individual client, the child, and the family from which that child comes, and designing interventions, supports, and opportunities, plans, and guidance in helping that child to and that family to flourish. And this work that I'm talking about is a national movement. It's a movement that started a long time ago with the Harlem Children's Zone, which one of our guests tonight leads. It's work that is talked about there was a broader, bolder coalition in the United States for 20 years or so saying that it's more than schooling. It includes organizations like Purpose-Built Communities, who works in 30 different communities, primarily in the South, working in neighborhoods, or Harlem Children's Zone, which I mentioned, Strive Together. A host of different kinds of we have rural partners for rural impact. We have communities in schools. We have the Community Schools Coalition. We have Promise Neighborhoods. A variety of organizations who have seen the importance of this work and seen this work move to the center of the discourse of what constitutes a real strategy for achieving equity in this country. There's increased reach. There are more than 400 communities who have bodies like this working on this agenda. We have funders, major funders, one of whom is represented on our panel tonight, Blue Meridian Partners, who are making major investments in this kind of work. And we have growing awareness among policymakers at both the local, state, and national level of the importance of this work. And so work that was once thought to be sort of incidental to the work of schools is moving to the center of the conversation, and that's what we're here to talk about tonight. And so we have, as I said, the world's greatest panel that we could possibly have to talk about this. So I'm going to invite my panelists to come up to stage, and then I'm going to briefly introduce them. Please welcome. You've had a chance, I think, to see their biographies in the registration materials that you had, so I'm not going to go into long biographical descriptions, or that would consume the bulk of the program this evening, so we're not going to do that. But I'll just briefly mention them by name and say a word or two about them. And I'm going to add a personal note to these, which is not what we usually do at these events. But these are friends, these are colleagues, these are movement leaders that I and my colleagues at Ed Redesign have the great privilege and honor of working with. And so they're fellow travelers with us in a journey, in a movement that many of you, as I look around the audience, are part of that movement. And more of you can join that movement, and that's one of our objectives tonight. So Cecilia Gutierrez is with us in white. And she's the managing director and portfolio lead of Blue Meridian Partners, that major funder that I was talking about earlier. And she's joined tonight by her son, Grayson, so you better be nice to her. We have children in the audience tonight. And when I think of Cecilia, it's not just that she's the leading funder in this sphere, but she's someone who brings a constant source of spirit, joy, lightness, optimism, and humor to the work that we do together. And for that, we're very appreciative of her. Sitting to her right, to your left, as you look at it, is Kwame Owusu-Kese, who is a 3 Harvard degree man. More importantly, he's from my hometown, which is Worcester. And he leads the Harlem Children's Zone. He is a towering presence in our field, a pace-setting person who holds us all to a high standard and pushes us to move higher in the work that we do, to go to a higher place. And for that, we're deeply appreciative, Kwame. To his right, to your left, is Sandra Samuels. And I forgot to mention Kwame's title, so I'll say it, CEO of the Harlem Children's Zone, which I should have said before. Sandra Samuels is the president and CEO of the Northside Achievement Zone. Northside Achievement Zone is probably the best example of the Harlem Children's Zone inspired work that exists around the country right now. She's very proud of that work. We're very proud to be associated with that work. She's our preacher at some level. She brings heart, soul, and political savvy to this work, and an amazing, inspiring energy, which I'm sure you're about to experience. So thank you, Sandra, for that inspiration. And last but not least, a Harvard dad who also has his son Maxwell in the audience. So again, you better be nice to Russell. Russell is a school guy who's had a whole career in education, long-term service as a superintendent. He's from Spartanburg, South Carolina, where he's the CEO of Spartanburg Academic Movement. So he's somebody who's in his career moved from schools to a backbone organization. And on top of that, I think of Russell as kind of the embodiment of, I mean, he's our Southern brother. He's the embodiment of congeniality, of compassion, of connecting with other people, of just an ethical compass and grace in doing this work. And we love having him here. He's one of our senior fellows at Ed Redesign this year. And our students have loved having him here, and we love having him on this panel. So anyway, we've got a great panel, and my job is now just to ask a few questions and keep us moving. So let me see if I can get over here without falling on my face. And here we go. So we have a few questions that we prepared in advance, and then Kwame, who am I going to start with? No, we have an opening statement, excuse me. I'm mixing up my script. So we've asked each of them to tell you a little bit about where they come from and their journey and how they become part of this work. And so, Sandra, I think we're going to start with you on that.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. Thank you, Paul. And I'm so excited that everybody's here and you care about this work and this revolution that's happening around education in our country. I'm originally from New Jersey, and I was born in the same hospital as Whitney Houston and Queen Latifah. I rap, I don't sing. And my family was part of the big exodus when fair housing legislation passed, and we moved out of Newark to the greener pastures of the suburbs. And right after the legislation passed, and I noticed a difference even at a young age, of the differences of kids who got stuck and left in Newark, New Jersey, which had happened, and that's not all kids, don't get me wrong, low income. And that happened all around the country in terms of, white flight. When we moved on our block in a suburb, it was all white. We were the first black family, and 5 years later, there was one white family left. And so you had white flight, but then you also had black middle class flight in the context I'm talking. And so you started having islands of isolation in many major cities. And so I noticed that as a kid, I grew up, went to 2 historically black colleges and universities, and did Peace Corps and AmeriCorps and Ford Motor Company before Peace Corps. But I live in a neighborhood in North Minneapolis very much like Newark. And I started disproportionately African-American, concentration of poverty. And I started noticing after watching my children grow up, the kids who were low income, very disparate outcomes. And education. And so I kind of left corporate and started doing nonprofit, working to end the violence that was happening in our community in North Minneapolis. And then realized quickly that violence was not the problem, but a symptom of a greater problem. And educational outcomes, family opportunity, lack of social mobility, all started becoming very, very obvious. And then finally, after leading that work and getting more and more into education, knowing that was a great equalizer, heard about the Harlem Children's Zone like 12 years ago or more. And the question got called in our community with, so I was leading a nonprofit, violence prevention, but housing, health, career, early childhood education. Could we do what was done in Harlem? And that's been the question we keep asking and working towards their really high mark.
Thank you, Sandra. Kwame.
All right. What's up, Harvard? Yes, my man in the back. What's going on? Y'all doing all right? All right. It's really good to be back home. And I say that with all sincerity. I spent 7 years of my academic life here. And in many ways, I'm the man I am today because of the holistic education I received here at Harvard. So this is a very special place for me, and an honor to be here. It's funny, I get asked the question a lot about, like, why are you in this work? And a couple years ago, I would always respond with like the LinkedIn ready version of, you know, it's at the intersection of my purpose and passion, and I want to do good and do well. And in the pandemic, actually, a couple of my Harvard roommates and I, we would have what we called like Black men therapy over Zoom, just connecting with each other about our insecurities, vulnerabilities, uncertainty, leadership, our work. And this question got posed. And they basically, it's like, that sounds like BS. Like, what is it really? And they were like, we have some hypotheses, and we went through that. And what we landed on was the real reason why I'm in this work is because I want my story to matter. And I don't say that with any degree of like selfish intention. Like, we all have our why that is anchored in our lived experience. And that is the true motivation of why I believe in this work and why I've dedicated my life to it. So a little bit about my story. As Paul mentioned, I grew up in Worcester, Massachusetts, about 45 minutes west of here. And a lot of the challenges that our young people face existed in my family in one way, shape, or form. And so I'm a son of immigrant parents that were never married, so I grew up in a single-parent household, domestic violence, teenage pregnancy, high school dropout. And it was education that changed my life trajectory. My mom played bingo at a local elementary school called Venerini Academy. And because the nuns fell in love with her and my family's story, they gave me a scholarship. That scholarship put me on an education trajectory with high-quality academics, enrichments and exposures, but most importantly, with adults who believed in my potential. And it's funny, the nuns would always say, and they weren't joking, that, Kwame, we think you're going to be the first Black president of the United States. Now, I have zero political aspirations, zero. But they really believe that. And there is something about being surrounded by adults who believe in your potential. The battery that was put on my back and opened up a world of possibilities ultimately led for me to be one of the first in my family to attend college. Graduated Harvard College with a degree in economics, and like most 21-year-olds, had no idea what the heck I wanted to do with my life. So I said, where are my friends going? So that introduced me to the wonderful world of Wall Street investment banking. So I began my career as an investment banking analyst at Morgan Stanley. And ironically, it was my time at Morgan Stanley that I learned of the work of the Harlem Children's Home. So much so that they sponsored me for a year to work along some guy named Jeff Canada. And I tell the story about meeting Jeff. It was supposed to be a 20-minute interview. It turned into an hour-and-a-half love affair. Probably one-sided on my end. I was like, who was this guy? He's like Martin mixed with Malcolm. Like, will you be my dad?
Yes,
like,
right.
I'm all in. And that year changed my life. And I always had the intention of going back to business school. But that year at Harlem Children's Home, I decided to apply for a double master's at Harvard Business School and Harvard Kennedy School because I wanted to explore this intersection of the public and private sector. And you hear buzzwords at the time like social entrepreneurship or impact investing. Was there a career for me at this nexus? Would I go back to the for-profit sector and do philanthropic things on the side, or vice versa? But the thing that you will learn about the Harlem Children's Zone is we are very much a gang. So unbeknownst to me, it was Harlem Children's Zone for life, right? I had very much got baptized in the holy waters of HCZ. And so during my third year of my joint degree program, Jeff gave me a call. He said, I want you to come back. I said, absolutely, sign me up. Had no idea how much money I would make, had no idea what my job title would be. But for me, it didn't matter because it was about mission. And when I reflect back on my own personal journey, right, it was very much the luck of bingo that changed my life trajectory. And I wanted to be a part of something that removed luck from the equation entirely and made that the norm for tens and thousands of young people year in and year out. So for me, this work is extremely personal. It's not about charity. It's not about feeling good about myself. It's about unlocking the great potential that exists in our communities, right? I believe in the work of the Harlem Children's Zone. I live in Central Harlem. I met my wife in Central Harlem. I'm raising my two beautiful girls in Central Harlem. So I'm all in personally, professionally, and I feel like I have the best job in the world because every day I get to authentically walk in my purpose.
Thank you, Kwame. Cecilia?
Thank you, Paul. Buenas noches. I just want you to know something that Paul mentioned, which is all of us on the stage are not only colleagues, but we're friends. Mm-hmm. And I think that one of our purposes as colleagues is to support each other, mm-hmm. to help each other thrive. And so I happen to support each one of these folks financially in this work, mm-hmm. but I am also their greatest cheerleader because mm-hmm. I'm such a big believer in all that they do. And I say that because oftentimes when you start off in your career, you feel like it's a competition. Like there isn't enough room for every single person to actually be successful and to thrive and to advance the work. And that is like a mindset shift that even myself in my career, I've had to have. Mm-hmm. My story is very similar to Sandra and Kwame's story, which is I am a daughter of an immigrant mom who was the youngest of 12 children, who grew up poor in the Dominican Republic, came to this country and was also poor. She met my father in New York City dancing, because she loves to dance, and had 4 children, and was divorced when I was 2 years old. We were we received Section 8 housing. We were on welfare. I grew up at a time when it was a physical paper, so there was a lot of shame mm-hmm. of going to the store and mm-hmm. giving your welfare check mm-hmm. To buy food. Mm-hmm. And like Kwame, I got introduced in 6th grade to the Upper Bound program, which is a federally funded program for first-generation college students. And up until that point, what I want you to know about this thing of like feeling like you're the lucky one is I knew from a really early age, I would say from the age of 7 years old, that I was the greatest hope for my community and my family. Mm-hmm. I just knew that if I could make it, that somehow the rest of my family mm-hmm. could make it. That is an awesome responsibility to put on a child, but it also is symptomatic of this belief in this country that some of us can make it and others cannot. Mm-hmm. I grew up with two brothers and a sister. My sister and I have college degrees and master's degrees. My 2 Latino brothers got caught up in the 90s when there was a war on crime, when getting caught up with a dime of weed put you in jail, and they never got out of that system. Yeah. They didn't finish high school. They didn't even go on to have mm-hmm. a prominent mm-hmm. career the way that my sister and I do, because society made a choice mm-hmm. about who they were going to invest in and who they weren't. Mm-hmm. And that choice was they were going to invest in me. And as a result of that, I've always wanted to figure out how you eliminate luck from the equation. Mm-hmm. And so when I think about the Cradle-to-Career strategy, or like why I'm in this work, or what that means for us, the way that I describe it is, what does it look like for you to take a place and actually believe that every child in that place could be given a fighting chance to be wildly successful? We don't get to decide as a society or as adults who gets to make it, mm-hmm. but in fact, the entire community gets to do that. Mm-hmm. And the truth is, we know how that's done, right? In an upper class community, in a middle class community, that's what happens. But in a community like Lynn, Massachusetts, in which I grew up, you get to pick and choose who gets to make it. And so that's part of my journey. But I got a scholarship to go to Boston College. I'll say I had a widely successful college career. I was vice president of the student body, the first ever Latina to ever do that, with an African American as president. Mm-hmm. And for a moment, I thought about running for office, and I quickly decided that's not for me. I also didn't know any better, right? Because when I was growing up, I didn't know like what I could be. So then I was like, well, I really care about lifting people out of poverty. I really want to do this work. So then I thought about maybe I should be a nun. And then I quickly realized I'm not very obedient, so I quickly got that out the door. And really, like, this space that all of us are now in was almost like, just like Sandra said, like, there was this inspiration that those of us that started to think about in the social sector space, how you truly lift people out of poverty. And then you started to hear about this wildly successful man called Jeffrey Canada in Harlem, at the Harlem Children's Zone, doing transformative work for all children in Harlem. And all of us who cared about that got inspired and started to do that.
Right. Right.
And this movement has been birthed out of that, has gotten more sophisticated along the way. But it is the greatest hope is that what happened in Harlem could happen across the country.
Yeah.
And that's why we're all on stage doing this.
Thank you, Cecilia.
Yeah.
Russell?
Yeah, and you're making that happen, and we so appreciate it. Good evening. Thank you all for being here. I took a pretty traditional pathway to the superintendency. I was a middle school teacher. That was my passion, was middle school. A middle school counselor. I was a coach. Middle school principal, high school principal, and at 36, I found myself in the superintendent's role. Around 2011, 2012, while being superintendent, two nonprofits were taking shape in Spartanburg, South Carolina, my hometown. One of the nonprofits was an organization called the Northside Development Group. And this organization was looking at one of our most disinvested neighborhoods. And they were looking to go through a transformation and revitalization effort within that community. My highest poverty elementary school sat within that neighborhood. And as a result of that, I became intimately involved in the work of the Northside Group as we were looking to support Cleveland Elementary, a 100% poverty school, bottom 5% academically. So became intimately involved working with the Northside. At the same time, another nonprofit was launching, and it was a Cradle-to-Career nonprofit called the Spartanburg Academic Movement. And as they were looking to put that board together, they wanted to make sure they had the right voices around the table. So I would become involved with the Spartanburg Academic Movement for two reasons. One, as one of the founding board members, but also as a direct beneficiary of the work that they would be doing in Spartanburg. Had a wonderful career in education, loved every minute of that work. But in 2020, I retired, 49 years of age, full retirement. I read a couple of books when I turned 45, and Kwame was talking, he's gonna be 40 soon, y'all.
May 6th, May 6th.
May 6th.
May 6th.
And one of those books was written by Bob Buford. It was called Halftime, and it really speaks about, you know, that second part of your life. You know, you spend that first half going to school, you know, getting the career, getting married, raising children. And so often when the children are gone and, you're near retirement, you're looking at your wife wondering, who are you? And, and I didn't want that. So I started to really, at 45, think about what did I want the next portion of my life to look like? And at the same time, Paul, as you were talking about education, I'll just be honest, I was getting frustrated. As a superintendent, as a teacher, I just felt like people were just throwing darts at us all the time. You know, you've got this half of the room that, we would just say, Russell, if you would just fix the schools, if y'all would just get it right, innovate, reform, our communities, all of our problems will be solved. And I'm over here looking at them saying, well, you know what? If y'all can fix some of the systemic issues that you created, if you can get the communities right, if you can get housing right, if you can really start taking care of our children and families, you'll have stronger schools. So it became this constant tension about what comes first. Is it the chicken or is it the egg? Fix the schools or fix the communities. And as I started thinking about the work that was taking place at SAM, and as I started thinking about the work that was taking shape on the north side, the board at SAM said, Russell, you're retiring. We would love for you to come and assume the role of CEO. And it was at that moment where I said, I have an opportunity to get out of the chicken and egg conversation and really answer the question. And what really comes first is not the chicken, it's not the egg, it's the nest. And what I have the opportunity to do every day is to work on building a nest now in Spartanburg, building the right conditions for our children and our families to thrive. So you already gave an illustration of what Cradle-to-Career looks like. You know, our children have to be born healthy and supported if they're going to thrive. And life is longitudinal, y'all. It doesn't happen just in these different incremental phases. But are they born ready? Are they ready for school? Are they reading by 3rd grade? What are those transitions like between middle school to high school? Are they graduating ready? And then entering post-secondary, persisting and completing. So to be able to play that role, but also now to work on a bigger stage, to also work and convene the community around all of those impediments that our children face and all of those other systems that are so vital, that's what brought me to my new role in this second portion of my life, leading the Spartanburg academic movement.
Thank you, Russell. I think you can see now why we've invited this panel and get a little bit of a flavor of who they are. So, Kwame, so many people have referred to Harlem Children's Zone as kind of the origin story of this work, and it all comes back to that. And, you know, the New York Times 20 years ago described it as the most ambitious social experiment of our time. So you've been at it a long time, and I know you're the second or third story leader here, but, you know, curious to hear you talk a little bit about what you've learned, you know, as an organization over that period of time, and kind of your trajectory from, you know, starting Harlem Children's Zone to the Promised Neighborhoods to the William Julius Wilson Institute, what you've learned, how that animates you looking forward and thinking about your agenda in the future.
Wow, that's a big question. Well, first, we no longer view it as a social experiment. Right, we have 20 years of evidence that this works. And so now I say we have the vaccine to poverty, and we have a responsibility to be able to codify those best practices and share that with the field, and also work in partnership with the field, because we don't have a monopoly on excellence, to continue to learn from my colleagues, innovate in order to move this work forward. But there's been tremendous experiences over these last 2 decades. And when I'm a data guy, we're a data organization, right? I'm a nerd at heart. And when I think about what we've been able to accomplish over the last 20 years, and even thinking about it through the lens of different stages of the pipeline. So we've graduated over 8,000 graduates from our baby college. We've eliminated the black-white achievement gap in our schools.
That's it right there.
And even this past year have returned to pre-pandemic levels. So just continuing to hold a high bar of academic excellence. In our charter schools that we run, 100% college acceptance, 100% high school graduation. We currently have 1,000 kids enrolled in our college success office. And since probably 2010, 2011, graduated over 1,500 students from college. And year in and year out, we have 100 to 150 new college graduates in Harlem. We've reduced overweight and obesity rates. There's been 3 federal initiatives modeled off of our work. When you think about Promised Neighborhoods, Choice Neighborhoods, Promised Zones, and over $2 billion of public dollars because of our model has now been invested in the field. And we have a strong field with so many pockets of excellence trying to reshape what is possible for communities that are impacted by poverty. And COVID was a terrible time. There's no sugarcoating that. And I had the great timing of trying to become CEO in 2020.
Right.
And what I appreciated about that was Harlem Children's Zone's intentionality around succession planning. So Jeff Canada was our founder and CEO. Ann Williams-Isom was the second CEO, who's now deputy mayor of New York City. And then I was blessed with the opportunity, and that was announced in 2019. what that afforded me was the opportunity to create a strategic plan and do essentially my first 100 days prior to assuming the role. So that's what allowed me to be prepared for when the pandemic hit. And one of the key elements of that strategic plan was a focus on national impact. Because the mission of the Harlem Children's Zone was never just about Harlem or New York. In many ways, it was viewing ourselves as research and development for the field, an innovation hub.
Yeah.
And how do we be the model to shaping minds about what's possible and have that proliferate all across the nation? And we've always had folks come and visit us over the last 2 decades, probably over 570 different communities, 70 different countries from across the globe. But it was always to come and learn the story of the Harlem Children's Zone. And now we have been focused on, beyond just telling our story, how do we meet places where they are at, recognizing the expertise and excellence that exists in place, leverage our knowledge and best practices, working in community with one another to be able to chart a different path forward. And so I've recruited Jeff Canada out of retirement. And he and I co-founded what we call the William Julius Wilson Institute, which today has over 18 colleagues, one of which has joined us today, Christian Rhodes, who's one of the most talented individuals in this country, and I stand by that.
Yes, he is.
Even though he has jokes. He has jokes on me, so I'm gonna get him, but that's my guy. But really understanding we have a unique opportunity to provide technical assistance to the field, to engage in general field building, to help shape policy. And that's pretty much what's governing our work moving forward. And my focus, because we have such talent as Jeff and Christian and our other colleagues, and I'm also joined by my wonderful colleague, Steph Littlewell, who's gonna be really mad that I just shouted her out, but is understanding none of this works if we don't continue to have a high bar in Harlem. And for me, one of the things that I've learned the most is the biggest impediment to future success is past success. Oftentimes we become complacent and want to rest on the laurels of the past. And complacency leads you down a path to mediocrity, which then gets you closer to irrelevance. And that's not saying throw out all of the lessons of the past, right? In many ways, in the spirit of saying, Kofa, how do you bring the lessons of the past forward? But we are engaging in an ever-evolving context. The work is getting harder day by day, not easier. I'm still very hopeful, and that's what I see as the next frontier of our work.
Great. Thank you, Kwame.
Thank you.
Sandra, Northside Achievement Zone was one of the nation's first promised neighborhoods, and you've come to be seen as a proof point of doing this work at the neighborhood level, you know, the kind of work that Kwame and Jeff have done with their colleagues in Harlem. I wonder if you could talk about you got into this a little bit earlier, but NASA's origin story and current impact in Minneapolis, you know, and especially serving as a beacon of hope in the times of George Floyd and other challenges that you've met with in your neighborhood.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. It was no surprise to me that George Floyd got murdered in Minneapolis. It was like, it wasn't, you know, if, it was when. And I'll get into that. But by the way, you know, Kwame just talked about Harlem Children's Zone and really building the field, that they've kind of gotten to this level now, and then under your leadership of supporting the rest of us. So like, this is a movement. Like, it's like really, really a movement. And you know, right during COVID, next thing you know, Kwame, you know, does, you know, big audacious project, gets millions of dollars and says, you get money, Minneapolis, you get money, Newark, and you get money. And I mean, millions of dollars in COVID relief came to us through Harlem Children's Zone because we have this network, right, where we're so connected. And we keep saying, like, we believe, like you said, it's no longer a social experiment. I love that. We believe it can get done because it's done there. We call Harlem Children's Zone moonwalkers, right? Because I keep saying, you know, at one point, everybody thought you couldn't get a person on the moon. And then, you had Russia went first, right? And then when I flew in today, I saw the quote, and I'm gonna get to your question. When I flew in today at the airport, it was the big thing, because the JFK Museum and stuff like that. I want to check that out. But JFK said, we choose to go to the moon in this decade and do other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Like, drop the mic. And it's like, because what we're talking about is changing the very trajectory of our country when it comes to kiddos, and not because it's easy. Does anybody here want to do something easy?
No.
Like, I mean, why, right? I mean, I think we got this finite time. And so anyway, but we heard about Harlem Children's Zone in North Minneapolis, where the greatest gaps in the country are in Minnesota. So in terms of achievement gaps, white kids do here, kids of color down here, particularly African Americans, across most indicators, especially academically. And then again with George Floyd, also we have some huge gaps in terms of incarceration and so on and so forth. But so anyway, we were all in our silos. Doing our work. I was doing violence prevention, but we were getting more and more into education, because all the kids who were getting murdered and doing the murdering had terrible educational outcomes, and challenges in terms of the home environment. And so, and then you had housing organizations. Anyway, so some funders got us all together, because they had gone to Harlem. And they asked all the fundees to come together. And so when your funder asks you to come to a meeting, you come. And so, but we were from every industry, and they told us about Harlem. Some folks had gone to Harlem. We saw a Harlem video, and it was like, okay. And then the question got asked, if they can do it in Harlem, like, we don't think these are special people anymore. Their kids are no more special than our kids. Then we're not Harlem, but what can we do North Minneapolis style? And so we decided to give it a try. And we said, let's do this. Let's build this place-based movement, because there are places in the United States where we predictably know that the outcomes for kids, particularly kids of color and low-income children, are going to be egregious. And that's why we love Blue Meridian, where Cecilia supports all of us, because they are so focused on place-based. But so we just decided, we said, yeah, let's what we're doing in our silos, housing. You keep saying, oh, if the schools, like you said, Russell, everybody's like, pointing fingers. Oh, if the schools were right, and the schools are saying, oh, but if home was right, and home is saying, oh, but, if that was right, and early childhood centers, we could go on. And so we decided, let's do it, let's try it. And so we started building and visiting Harlem Children's Zone and trying to figure out how it could work in our city. And by the way, we're doing it according to our cities and our culture. We're not trying to do Harlem, but we are trying to learn from the best practices. So anyway, so we started meeting, and at that point, we had a $450,000 budget. Then, because community leaders were coming together across all these organizations, and then we became the backbone. A collaborative can't lead itself collaboratively. Like, you got to have some kind of backbone to the body that wakes up every night, wakes up every day thinking about how the connection happens on the ground, from cradle to college, from pre-birth to, because we're going back, like we feel like we got to get to the womb. Pre-birth to profession, there's a lot of different things we call it. Work, womb to work, and so on. But anyway, we started building, and then Obama got elected. And then Jeff and Angela Glover Blackwell from Policy Link, came together with this playbook for the Obama administration, because he had heard of the Harlem Children's Zone and said when he became president, he was going to replicate this in 21 in communities across the country, and that he kept his promise. We received one of the 5 first implementation grants. So we received $28 million. Sorry, $3 million matters. $28 million over 5 years to build up this place-based, womb to work, collaborative action, organization, housing, health, career, early childhood, K through 12, after school, summer, and then we do a whole host of parenting education and youth programming, and I will tell you that, and the money stopped in 2016. And we've been able to, because of what we've built there and because of the impact. And by the way, my husband and I had a parenting show also. And Dr. Ron Ferguson was always our guest. We built in terms of early childhood and the achievement gap, we built our show on your work. And so he always had to call in. We had him burning up. We wanted to burn up his phone. But anyway, since then, I will tell you that the continued support of folks in the field, of Harlem Children's Zone now in this new place of really like spreading the love across our country, we are in such, if I die tomorrow, I will say from my grave, the way we are doing it together, right, across industries, across sectors, same mission, same focus on children, same commitment to helping children to accumulate and develop human capital, social capital, financial capital, so that we create generational wealth, that this is the way to do it. The silos don't work. And that's what you were talking about earlier, Paul, around education. They just do not work. It's Heather McGhee's book. I don't know if any of you have checked that out, The Sum of Us. Right, The Sum of Us. She talks about the solidarity dividend, that when we come together across all of our differences with the focus, for me, on our children, there's nothing we can't do. There's just nothing we can't do. And that's been the power in our community, that I have 30 partners in all the different industries. We meet monthly. Plus, my staff is embedded in their organizations. We have family achievement coaches and so on. And when COVID happened, we didn't have to build trust. We stood on the trust we had built. Because this is the miracle. If you know nonprofits, we're all competing for the same dollars, it seems like sometimes. But you have your own board, your own staff, your own mission statement. And so you got to do your thing. But it doesn't work for children. And I'm going to close, Paul, by just saying this. And so I'll talk some more about the outcomes, because you have to be data-driven in this movement, or the support dries up really fast, right? So, but we're seeing incredible outcomes. And what we know, the academic piece for us is COVID kicked our tails. And we don't have the same story as Harlem. I mean, we were making such significant gains. And I mean, it feels like so many things got eroded. Our public school system has a $110 million deficit. They're laying everybody off. All the gains, the mental health support we had happening, all our mental health partners are losing their budgets. The crime has not abated. You know, it's lower than it was. But anyway, I saw the academic data recently, and, you know, I almost wanted to quit. And but what I realized is that data is about us, the adults, not the children, because they have everything they need to become contributing, well-adjusted adults, and it is us who are failing them, and I include myself, and I include all of you, because if we're not leaning in, then we're part of the problem. But the thing that I'm excited about is, because I know that we, the adults, are the problem. You know, they say that any obstacle to your path becomes the path. Then we're also the solution. So I have a lot of hope.
Thank you, Sandra. Like I said, the preacher. Okay, Russell, tell us a little bit about your hometown of Spartanburg, and talking about dollars. I mean, you've set very ambitious goals for the future, for 2030, and what you want to do there. And you've attracted tens of millions of dollars to, you know, a small, you know, rural community. And tell us a little bit about not only how you've done that work, but how you've partnered with other organizations, national organizations around the country, to get it done.
Sure. And I appreciate you referencing me earlier as a Southern gentleman.
Yes.
Do I have any other Southerners in the room? Will you please raise your hand? All right. Thank you. So happy to just share a little bit about Spartanburg, South Carolina. It is home for me, first of all. I'm a proud product of the state of South Carolina. Spartanburg is a very philanthropic community. We birthed our state's first community foundation. We're a data-driven community. We were one of the early adopters of the national community indicators. We're an adaptive community. We were an old mill town. The mills went away. We had to reimagine what our community would look like. And so now advanced manufacturing has become, one of our key industries. But even thinking about education and the superintendent who preceded me in 1890, a superintendent who really helped to launch our public schools, built the first public schools first buildings for public school purposes, for blacks and whites. He sat on the board of overseers here at Harvard. He was the president at Texas A&M, at Texas University. He was a chancellor at Washington University. He went on and worked in Woodrow Wilson's administration. He was the Secretary of Agriculture, helped to start our interstate system. Went on to become Secretary of the Treasury and helped launch the U.S. Reserve Bank. So that's the DNA from District 7, where I ended up following as superintendent. We're 12th fastest growing community in the country right now, according to U.S. News and World Report. Southern Living just ranked us the 3rd best place to live in the South.
Wow.
So y'all know Southern Living over there. That's what a lot of y'all don't even know the magazine.
Wow. Wow.
But Paul, you shared some data from Raj Chetty a little while ago. And so we look at the positives, but we also look at the fact that when Dr. Chetty's data came out not too long ago around economic mobility, you can see that the South is awfully red, which means children being born in communities like mine, it's not likely that they'll ever move from the bottom 20th quintile to the upper unless we start to do some things. And when that data came out, it shook my community. When we started looking at data around life expectancy and seeing that there are 17-year differences in census tracts and children being born, just a few red lights away from one another, that shook our community. And that's why we're now leveraging these partnerships. I mentioned the Spartanburg academic movement earlier. What I didn't share was that the Spartanburg academic movement is part of a larger national intermediary called Strive Together. Strive Together consists of some 70 partnerships across the country. Sandra is one of those partners. I now have the privilege of sharing that national board, so I get to see the work up close. I didn't mention that the Northside Development Group is the 7th or 8th community in the Purpose-Built Communities Network. So we, early on, we were working with Strive Together and the Northside Development Group and Purpose-Built to really do this work together. And it took some of that expertise to get us together because we were drawing from other communities across the country. That school that I mentioned, I remember in 2012 when we started those partnerships. Some of y'all remember Race to the Top?
Yeah.
Okay, some of y'all remember the school improvement grants? Yeah. So we had 4 schools that qualified for those grants. And you had 4 options. You could close them, you could reconstitute them, which means everybody had to be let go and you had to hire brand new. You could bring someone in to run the schools, or you could transform them. And we made the tough decision to close a couple of schools. That was one of my first tasks as superintendent. But on the north side, the decision was made to transform Cleveland. And we made that decision because of some of those partnerships we were in with those groups. I'll just fast forward for time's sake. It's taken 10 years, and it's a traditional school. And we said we're going to stay with this traditional model because we want to see if we can do it. That school this year received its first ever excellent report card rating, and that school now was just named one of South Carolina's Beating the Odds schools. So it takes that kind of time, but that's not enough. So from there, we started to learn that if this work isn't multi-generational, we're really never going to get there. Blue Meridian taught us that if you're not working at the place-based level, we're part of a group called Place Matters, you're not going to get there. I didn't learn how to do that in my graduate schools of education. You're learning that from Paul. So count that a gift. I didn't call Jeff Canada. I emailed Sandra Samuels in January of 2022 because I was at a Council on Foundations meeting and one of the speakers was talking about you. So I asked Josh Davis, I Googled you, and how can I get a connection with her? And that's how you and Josh Davis had done some panel together. Josh is with Strive together. And I said, will you connect me with her? Emailed you, she emailed me back. I told her we were looking at promised neighborhoods. You didn't know me from Adam's House Cat. That's a Southern thing, I guess. And she emailed me back. She said to me, Russell, I have roots in York, South Carolina. I have family now in North Carolina. I consider that place to be home. I'll send you my stuff. She came to visit us. So it was through you, through y'all, that she really got me on this pathway. She said, you need to go to Harlem. Contact the Practitioners Institute. They allowed me to bring almost a busload of people up there. And really set us on our trajectory. So that was my first introduction to William Julius Wilson. And then you all came together, Paul, and Ed Redesign, William Julius Wilson. You said, let's put a summer institute together. And all of us came together at that summer institute. And it was one of the most amazing things I'd ever been a part of.
Me too.
So then I started learning about Ed Redesign. And now here I am, a fellow, one of the best professional and personal growth opportunities I've ever had. I have a superintendent now because y'all have launched collectively a cohort of 20 some odd superintendents to start teaching them about this work. So that is now happening. And I just see as you're talking about this field building, last quick thing, because it hadn't just been y'all. And Cecilia, I hope we talk about money in a minute. But there's a community now, another county, much more rural than we are, who they want to do this work. And through a partnership now with Partners for Rural Impact, she's going to come in and support me in helping that community develop a comprehensive plan as well. So I'm just excited at this moment we're in right now. And there's been a ripple effect with all of that. So Kwame's my hero, Sandra's my hero, Cecilia's my hero, Paul's my hero, and Ron, you're my hero too. The work going on with the basics, and it all goes together.
Basics.
I could just go around the room and talk about how we're all so connected. I'll shut up.
Okay, thank you, Russell, for bringing us all together like that. Okay, Cecilia, Russell teed you up. We want to talk to you about
money.
BMP. What's Blue Meridian Partners all about, and why do you choose this movement to invest in? What is it about this that's promising to you?
I'm going to answer your question in 3 parts. I want to talk a little bit about what do we know about dollars available right now in philanthropy. I want to tell you a little bit about the Blue Meridian story, and then I'll talk to you about this portfolio called Place Matters. Before I do that, I just want to connect the dots because I come from the work. So I myself led a neighborhood place-based partnership. In 2010, like Sandra, I too submitted a Promised Neighborhood grant, as did hundreds of community. And I was so jealous when Sandra got it and I didn't get it. But I want to know, I was so persistent. I was like, they clearly got it wrong. I literally I was the executive director of a nonprofit organization. I took my own money, flew to Washington, D.C.
Oh, girl.
And was like, you all got it wrong. And at the time, the person leading this work was Jim Shelton, who's now the president of Blue Meridian.
Wow.
And I share that with you because I convinced Jim Shelton at the time that he really got it wrong and he needed to come to my neighborhood, spend a day with us, and change his mind. And so he did. He appeased me because I wasn't going to let it go, came to Liberty City in Miami where I was working, spent an entire day with us, came to my collaborative table, walked through the neighborhood, saw the transformation, did a whole tour, gave me $0. But I was so convinced that we were on to something really magnificent, and clearly they got it wrong. I share that because it starts with this origin story around when all of us who are in the social sector space go after the same pot of dollars. And some folks get it and some folks don't. And that creates for us this scarcity mindset. We're like competing against these small dollars. And then philanthropy on the other side is like providing you with just like a $50,000 grant or a $30,000 grant, or getting like $1 million is a big deal. But we know that it's insufficient for the scale of the problem. I mean, like what Sandra and Russell and Kwame are talking about is transforming the lives of children born into poverty and putting them on a path to economic success. That doesn't happen on like $50,000 or $30,000. Like, you need to demand a lot more dollars. So I'll start with point one. Here's what we know about the data. There is literally right now, if we do nothing else, if no other dollars get submitted in the philanthropic space, $18 trillion just sitting on the sideline. They sit in what's called DAF, donor advised funds. Wow. They sit mainly in local community foundations. So folks are just sitting on billions of dollars that just sits there, ready to be unlocked towards a cause that matters. But Blue Meridian, all of that is about social and economic mobility. So I just want you to know, this scarcity mindset needs to be switched to an abundance mindset, because it's not as though the dollars aren't there. It's how do we really unlock the dollars? The origin story for Blue Meridian is we're 7 years young, and it came out of the Anna McConnell Clark Foundation. Nancy Rube led that foundation for 20 years. The Clark family decided to sunset. They decided that they were going to distribute all their dollars during their lifetime. And as a result of 20 years experience in philanthropy, Nancy saw two things that she was trying to solve. The first one is there are all this high net worth, philanthropic effort, folks with lots of dollars who want to do really good work in the world. And they don't know where to put their dollars. And on the other side, you have phenomenal leaders like Paul and Sandra and Kwame and Russell, who have big dreams, huge vision, who are trying to transform solutions, who have actual solutions that actually work, but they're not getting the right size capital to do that work. And Blue Meridian was designed to essentially aggregate significant capital and make significant investment in leaders like you see on stage to actually solve work at scale. Could you scale this work so that other communities across the country could do no different? Our investments then turn into 50 million, 100 million, 80 million. And so that's our origin story. And over the 7 years, we've been able to raise $4.8 billion. And we have invested close to $2.8 billion into leaders that you see on stage and many others through what we call 4 different portfolios. But I'll just focus on the last part, which is so what is this place-based, place matters portfolio? Interestingly enough, in 2016, Blue Meridian always saw itself as scaling evidence-based program and also thought about a place-based approach. And we started with Tulsa and Guilford County in North Carolina in partnership with the Duke Endowment and the George Kaiser Foundation. But in 2019, 2020, Jim Shelton, who was one of the founders of the Promised Neighborhood grant under the federal government, joined Blue Meridian and decided to design what was initially called Power of Place, that we now call Place Matters.
Place Matters, right.
In 2020, you see the theme of 2020 in the midst of COVID, the Place Matters portfolio made its first set of investment. It was made in May of 2020 to Strive Together, the network that Russell just talked about, and another organization that was a part of actually the Government Performance Lab, OA, which was what would it look like to actually transform the public sector and really connect the public sector with this thing called backbone organization, place-based partnership, words that you're hearing, community, that sort of connection. And then within literally 6 months span, we ended up investing in 12 communities across the country with an initial $8 million to $7 million investment over 2 years. And as a result of that, we decided to make a deeper investment in 5 communities across this country to continue to support this idea that has emerged around proof points. Could you create proof points across the country that would inspire both the social sector, the philanthropic community, and the public sector to actually do this for all communities across the country? Could this be the strategy that actually helps to put thousands of children on a path to social and economic mobility? And at the same time that we decided to begin to invest in places, we also invested in neighborhood place-based partnerships. We have 19 places across the country in which we're investing in. But the other important part of our work is what we call catalytic support. That's just a fancy way of saying every single place across the country need additional supports. We need to figure out how we get incredible individuals like yourselves to decide that this is the place, this is the career that you want. We have to make sure that data and technology is a big part of what informs the outcome and impact of this work. There is, policy that is driven. There are like conditions in a community that allows you to actually be able to make significant progress and change for kids. And so we call that catalytic support, and we've made investment in many of the organizations that Paul talked about at the top of the hour, which is Purpose-Built Community, Strive Together, the William Julius Institute, which is embedded within the Harlem Children's Zone, and Partners for Rural Impact, in addition to many other organizations that we are working to make sure that they can provide real technical assistance support to places across the country. The idea is there is decades of knowledge and information about how to do this work well. And how do you really spread practices so that leaders across the country can go even further, even faster with the knowledge and the falling forward stories that we all have about what it takes to do this work. The last thing I'll leave you with is there is nothing easy about this work. I know we joke about how hard it is, but you can imagine the complexity of even what Sandra said. You get 30 different organizations, all with their own mission, their own governance, their own ability to sustain their work and raise their money, and then you try to get the mayor and the superintendent and the churches and the residents and the family, and you're trying to get them all to agree to have a vision for what it means to support every child in their community with disregard for somehow this kid's gonna make and this kid, how do you create that equity mindset for every single child in a community? That's something that I think gets us all jazzed up and excited about that possibility of an all. I hope that answered your question.
Okay, no, more than answered my question, actually. So our panelists have been so generous with their observations, and thank you. I think you're getting a sense of the scope of this work, that they've given me a problem as a moderator, which is we're out of time, and number one, I want to say we're going to take some questions from the audience, and we're going to distribute cards. And if you want to write on the card your question, and make it a question, please, and include your name on the card. We'll try and get to a few of those questions in a few minutes. We were going to do another big pass with the panel, but we've run out of time to do it. So I'm going to do a lightning round that has just. I'm going to pair some panelists and pair some questions, and then we'll do that for about maybe no more than a minute or two each in responding, and then we'll open it up to the questions that we get from the audience. So the first one, I think I'll ask Kwame and Cecilia to talk about this sort of underlying theme of here. We establish proof points as part of the theory of action, and then we scale this up. So I'm curious, Cecilia, from your angle, what's the play to unlock public money, which is by far the biggest pot of money to get, you move from the proof points to unlocking that public money. We've had some examples of it with the policy moves that Kwame talked about earlier, Promised Neighborhoods and other initiatives. But what do you see down the road? And from your standpoint, Kwame, with William Julius Wilson Institute and so forth, what does the scaling look like? What does the trajectory of that work look like? So if you could both each spend maybe a couple minutes on that.
I'll try to be brief to say philanthropic dollar can be a catalyst for creating these types of proof points that government can sustain. So, and the part of sort of the way Blue Meridian invests in dollars is we ask leaders to create what we call an investable plan. Almost every single investable plan, which lays out a real vision for children and family in that community, has not only what it needs from a philanthropic perspective, but how it will sustain and unlock public dollars to do so. So we actually very much see an intentionality around both philanthropic dollar being catalytic, but the sustainability of that really truly being public sector dollars. And every single plan that we have has that as a real intentionality moving forward. And I could spend hours on that. We can talk about much more about that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll take the baton on that. So once we are successful in unlocking both the philanthropic and public dollars, we need to make sure there are places that they can invest those dollars in that will win. Because we have one shot to tell this story. And if we are not prepared as a field, then that will just reinforce the negative mindsets and stereotypes about the ineffectiveness or the perceived ineffectiveness of this work that has been plaguing the country thus far. And so from our perspective, I would say, in a weird way, we've become victims of our own success. When we started this work, the Harlem today is not what it was when we started, and people have short-term memory around that. There was like no national chains. It was really hard to raise money and things of that nature. And now you see a thriving and vibrant community. And now folks start to say, well, there's a sexiness about New York City, Wall Street and funder environment, your ability to attract talent. So it was necessary for the success and vitality of the field to be able to shed a light on the exemplars that exists all across this nation in various forms, whether it is in urban areas, rural, suburban. We know excellence exists. And we have a responsibility to provide the megaphone to leverage our platform, our access, to be able to help shine a light on the excellence that exists in the field in order to be married once that capital is unlocked with the places who can receive that capital and continue to push the story further about the possibilities and all of the opportunities for communities that are impacted by poverty.
Great. Thank you both. Okay, Sandra and Russell, as has been amply demonstrated tonight, this work is about bringing people together, working together, and about collaborating across different lines and geographies and all kinds of elements. And I wonder if you talk about, first of all, the kind of value proposition that you make to both public and private sector for getting involved in this sort of work. And even more importantly, in these times of deep divisiveness and polarization in our country, why you see this work, because I think you do, as something that brings hope and possibility and brings people of different stripes together for common purpose.
Beauty before brains. Go ahead, Russell.
Like, beauty, you need to... Value proposition one to the school districts from us. You're not in this alone. Education isn't just your responsibility. We're here to walk beside you. Value proposition number two to the 7 school superintendents. We need the data, and this is the community's data. It's not just yours. I promise you, we won't use this data as a hammer. We won't use this data to pit you against one another. We won't use this data to harm you. They need to see it so they can step up. I was going to preach, I'm not. Value proposition number 3. If you will align with us, if we can align our resources, if we can come together on our outcomes, if we can come together on our talent, and co-create this plan together, I think we can move the needle. Value proposition number 4. If we create this plan, we'll find the money. We've got national partners who are willing to invest significant dollars. We've been able to raise over $100 million in little old Spartanburg, South Carolina to support this work. And then value proposition number 5, as we talk about the public sector, you're going to benefit from this. And we need for you to sustain this work. If our colleges can raise attainment, you're going to keep your Pell money. So there's a benefit in all of this for all of us if we can just come together and do this work. And then stay with us, and let's not have a scarcity mindset.
Right, yeah, absolutely. And briefly, I'm going to go briefly, the mayor of St. Paul recently, who's a brother, said, you know, there is one thing that we can all do to transform our educational landscape and to create wealth, generational wealth in communities. There is one thing, and that is to stop asking what the one thing is, right? And so really for us, the value proposition is it hasn't worked in our silos, like, right? It's not just early childhood. It's not just K through 12. It's not just housing. It's not just that, it's all of it, right? And so we're saying that we have a model on the ground. We're a microcosm. I feel like we're a microcosm of America, right? And that we're actually adults who are working well in the sandbox together. And we are, I don't even know, some of my colleagues have to be different political persuasion. I wouldn't know it. Because we're so focused on kids. We're so focused on the mission of creating generational wealth. And in fact, I'll stop by saying we started going to the state. We didn't get any state funding before like about 7 years ago. And so we started going to the state with all of those value propositions like, how's it working for you so far in Minnesota? Largest achievement gap. Got to innovate. We got to innovate. We are the innovation you seek. And so other communities who also were doing place-based work, part of Strive Together, both cities, us, St. Paul, but then rural areas in Minnesota, greater Minnesota, started coming together and actually advocating together at the state. And saying that because Minnesota wants to be known, and we got some good folks in Minnesota, so I know I dog them sometimes, but it really has some really great folks. They want to be known as the children's state. And so we're feeding into that desire that they have, and now they fund about 8 of us collectively, and we work together across the state with our place-based Strive Together movement at the tune of about $4 million a year.
Great. Okay. Thank you. So first question, what are the public policy implications for this work? What if you had to describe maybe a single public policy change you'd like to see at either the state or national level, or even at the local level, what would you prescribe?
I actually think the Maryland is a great example. I'm looking at Christian, who's been instrumental here. Governor Westmore has decided that ending child poverty in the state was part of his vision for the state, and as a result, created what's called the Enough Act that was just passed, which essentially allows for public dollars to be allocated for this work to proliferate across all of Maryland. So you can imagine, it's starting this year, but you can imagine there are 64 counties in the state of Maryland, all at various degrees of significant outcomes for children, some of which that are really vulnerable, where the data for children are just most dismal. But there's a real opportunity to actually bring this strategy to those communities and help support it. And part of, so like that I could see that that's a significant policy effort stemming from the Promised Neighborhood at the federal level. That's now a state policy that is driven by a governor to try to promote this specific strategy to the neediest neighborhoods in the state. I think that's a great example of like public policy implication.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there on that one because it's just in the interest of time.
Yeah,
yes,
But, okay, and here's another one. In states and cities where the philanthropic catalyst is converted to sustained government funding, what are the political preconditions you've noticed that are needed?
There's got to be a willingness. So I had a meeting with our county council Monday. We're going after $10 million of federal funding. It's a Republican council. There's one Democrat on it. County administrator wanted me to talk with them prior to going to them because he didn't know if they would want to accept the federal money. But through relationships, they decided that, yeah, we'll be the lead applicant. We believe in the work you're doing. I mean, but we've got to help them understand what this work is all about, too.
Right.
And it's not soft work. I mean, there's workforce that's involved in this. So I think that's going to be really important as we try to move this work along.
Okay. Here's another one. On the Cradle-to-Career pathway, how do you get and retain family buy-in?
I can jump in on that. I haven't met a single person who has the privilege of caring for a young person either as their child, mentor, mentee, brother, sister, that wouldn't commit to do anything possible to make sure that that young person can grow up to have a thriving life and transition to independent and healthy adulthood. And so it's really actually not a question about buy-in, because it's an innate desire that I think everyone shares. It's a real question, and related to a lot of the questions that were posed, about political will and prioritization. And the more that we can continue to share the success stories, the more that we can create a greater demand to shift from this scarcity to abundance mindset. But all of our families are truly bought in. And that's actually the American way.
Paul, and I have to. So I'm looking at Tahita. They're teaching us this through Ed Redesign with family navigation and success planning. It's not buy-in. They are telling us what they need also, and they've got to be a part of co-creating what they need in their families and
Put
communities.
the family at the center of the equation.
Yes.
Meet them where they are, give them what they need. Yep. Okay, we've had a couple of questions on internationalizing this work, because we have a lot of international students in the audience. And how does this work translate to other environments? Any examples, or what do you think about that?
So, just quickly, Strive Together, have to give a shout out, was this year's winner of one of the social innovation awards at the World Economic Forum. And as we talked to our president and CEO when she came back from there, she's really having to explain to them the value proposition with this work. So I think part of this is making greater connections with them. And she's going to be in those circles for the next 3 years. So I'm hoping she can be an evangelist for this work.
And I can also jump in. As I said earlier, we've had over 70 different countries come and visit us at the Harlem Children's Home, some of the countries that have way better education systems. And we always ask, because we're not marketing our work, why are you coming to visit us? And each and every one of them say, we have a marginalized population who is located in place, whether it's a religious minority, ethnic, or others, that we're trying to figure out how to bring holistic resources so that they can thrive. And so for us, this is not just an American story. This is truly an international story about where you live matters, where a child is born and raised has everything to do with their future prospects of success. So how do we weave together a net of services so tightly so that no one can fall through the cracks? And I think that has cross-boundary implications.
Okay. I'm going to use this last question to tee up the last questions I was going to ask you, so I'm in effect going to ask you 3 questions and give you a minute each, just sort of a closing statement here. So the question we have from the audience, how long do you feel we need to do this work until we don't need to do it anymore? Which I interpret as...
Who asked that question? What's your name?
That's Lisa.
Lisa? Okay, what's up, Lisa? Asking tough questions.
So that's a what does success look like question. But we also wanted to ask you, going out the door here, and to our students in particular in the audience, what if you were interested, if you're inspired by the work that we've been talking about tonight, what advice would you have for people who want to come into this work? And secondly, what gives you hope about doing this work? You get up each day and go after really hard work. What keeps you going and into the work? So if each of you could comment on that briefly, and then I'll have a couple of quick closing remarks and we'll adjourn.
Sandra, you want the last word? So we'll start here. So
sure.
Be ready. What you learned today, none of us started doing what we're doing right now. And I don't know what life is going to bring your way. Some of you are mid-career, some of you are starting off. Just be ready when that door opens. What gives me hope? I'll look at Vanessa out here, sophomore here at Harvard. I was on a call with Vanessa. She was telling me about her hometown of New Jersey. And one of the comments she made as we were talking, I never knew there was a pathway to even look at some of this work. And I was just so inspired as we were talking with your passion for this work. And I know a lot of you have that passion. And that's what gives me hope, because I think y'all are going to be the ones to move the needle ultimately.
Yeah. First, thank you for this opportunity. The thing that's I think that's surfacing for me the most, that I feels like in my heart to share with each of you, is part of what we're doing at Blue Meridian is investing in building the field of this work to be ready for individuals like you to enter and stay. And I think the thing that I most want to say is there is a real career here to stick with this strategy as a way of truly seeing real progress for children and families in this country. But it requires you to think about it like you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer. This will be your career for the rest of your life, because the results that we're trying to drive will take 20, 30 years to finally see that impact. And so it's an invitation. If you're thinking about this career seriously, it could be a long-term career where you can, if you stick around long enough, you can actually reap the fruit of real progress for kids who you met when they were just a baby and now they're at Harvard. So that's what I want to say.
All right. There was 3 questions, so I'm going to try to see if I can knock them out. So Lisa, right? The unsatisfactory response is, I don't know. By definition, this is intergenerational work. And for me, it's important to break mindsets that this is not going to be accomplished in funding cycles or election cycles. This is long-term work. And so my mindset around this is I'm going to try to advance this as far as humanly possible and set the conditions for success for the folks like you to take the baton and continue to run with it. So that's just my honest answer to that. What you all can do if you're interested in joining the field is please send me your resumes. I got my team here. If you want to come and work with any of our organizations and there's a match there, we will make that happen. I'm not
Cost of living's cheap in South Carolina.
Minneapolis is really turning a curve.
I'm going to leave it at that.
Competition going here.
And then finally, what gives me hope is it's this conversation, it's this relationships, it's the interconnectivity. Again, I'm home and I'm seeing so many individuals in the crowd like Professor Ferguson or Jody Smith-Bennett who have shaped my leadership in unique ways. And this idea of now not seeing ourselves through our respective lanes or in competition with one another, but the need for cross-sectoral leadership in order to advance this work in a meaningful way. And I think there's a national awakening about the possibilities. And it fills me with such a deep sense of pride and hope for the future.
The very foundation of this country is flawed, right? And so since the founding of this country, it's brought us to where we are today. All these stories, and then people will say, "Well, how much time should it take?" Right? And it's like, well, how much time did it take? To get us here. And, I'm reading this book called 4,000 Weeks. And the premise is that, if you live to the average age of 80, then that's 4,000 weeks, right? And I'm at about 3,650, something like that. But anyway, but we all have a finite amount of time here, right? And it's stories. It's just everything about our history are stories of people like you and me. Right, and Frantz Fanon, the African philosopher, Wretched of the Earth, said, every generation out of relative obscurity must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. Like everyone. And that means, and by the way, there are 6 generations living together right now on planet Earth. But that means that we all have, and you can deny it, you can walk away from it. I think that's a unfulfilled life, but we all have a historical, political, and social responsibility. We just do. And what gives me hope, many things give me hope, the kids and everything. But my board will tell you, and other people in Minneapolis, because I'll be like, yo, I'm going to talk at Harvard. and so, no matter what you all have, has been going on here in Ivy League, you still got a lot of cred.
Yes.
And so to say, there is a school at Harvard, their School of Education actually has this thing called Ed Redesign that actually holds up, I was passing out the syllabus. They're talking about us, you guys, collaborative. And I'm telling people, and then when you come visit and then people from my team are speaking at classes here and part of success planning where every child in the school, why only some kids have individual education plans? Shouldn't every child have an individual education plan? Mm-hmm. And so it's just so powerful. And so I have a lot of hope that an institution, and I think that's what we've all really said already, that an institution of this caliber is focusing on the most promising work to create generational wealth and to love up on all our kids, and that it's happening here. Gives us a lot of cred on the street.
Well, thank you, one, and thank you all for this. Before I ask you to join me in thanking them, let me answer the question to myself by way of thanking the panelists. In these troubled times, what gives me hope is the purpose and mission of this work and the quality and commitment and comradeship of the people doing the work and moving forward on it together. And that's just something that makes me and my colleagues feel like every day when we wake up, there's a reason to be optimistic about the things that we've been talking about tonight. And to that end, for those of you in the audience who are students who may be interested in this kind of work, the panel will be around for a few minutes afterwards, then we have to adjourn. But I want members of the Ed Redesign staff to stand up, if you would, please.
Yes. Woo! Yes.
These are folks who are, A, doing the work and deserve your applause and recognition, and B, if you want to connect with this work or connect with some of the people up here or have questions that you want to think about, please feel free to be in touch with any of us. That's what we're here for, to encourage you into the privilege and the honor of doing this kind of work. So with that, let me ask you to join me in thanking our spectacular panel.
Can I ask a picture?
Oh, yes.
Can we do a picture?
Sorry.